Welcome back to Essentials. Malone, here we are at the crossing of the Red Sea, which is, of course, such a familiar story even for very young people in church school. What do we need to know about this passage?
Well, there's a lot we could talk about, but the video could go on for an hour, and we don't want to do that. First, the setting. God's people are leaving Egypt. They know they're headed to Mount Sinai, but they don't really know where they're going beyond that. But they're on the move. The big takeaway from this passage, though, is that God will go to incredible lengths to deliver his people. His keeping of the covenant that he has made with them. And that's really the main thing we want to focus on. But as Christians, there's an elephant in the room, as you might say, as we read this. We know that as followers of Christ, we're to turn the other cheek and bless those who persecute us, to act in mercy and forgiveness. And yet, what we see here and what happens to the Egyptians seems a million miles away from that. So how are we to try to deal with this? Well, there's various interpretations. And for my part, I would say I don't think this is a depiction of exactly how things went out, nor is it a depiction of kind of what God is really like. I think perhaps this is how an ancient people of faith, who in their context, tribalistic Iron Age culture, is expressing what God would do, and that is they go to battle. And you show that your God is powerful by your enemies being destroyed before you. And that makes perfect sense within the context of what's going on here. I try, and this is difficult for, I think, most of us, I try to let the authors say what they do on their own terms, but then ask myself, what is the message saying to me out of Scripture about Jesus Christ, his gospel, and his call to me to grow in love by grace toward God and my neighbor? And so that's how I try to come at this passage. But regardless of how we look at it, again, the main takeaway is that God will go to every length to deliver his people, to care for his people, and to keep the covenant that he's made with them.
Well, that makes complete sense to me, Malone, and I'm grateful for that. I think probably for me, when I think about that passage, and you said it made perfect sense in the context. I think, you know, if I was in that scene and I had known the life that I lived under Pharaoh and what it meant to be enslaved and how it actually prevented me even from worshiping the God that I thought loved me, I would say, okay, God, you really have given me freedom here and I am appreciating it.
Absolutely.
But you're absolutely right. In the love that is revealed in Jesus, we are given a view into a God who actually is even more loving than that, in a way that it's like, oh, wait a second, I'm supposed to love those dead Egyptians? That's what God's telling me in Jesus? And mysteriously, I think that is true. What it means about that event, then, I think God has freedom to do whatever God does. I think in the light of Jesus Christ, what I know is that God's love is for his people, but he wishes for all humanity to be his people.
Well, you mentioned the Israelites, I guess soon to be Israelites, coming out. Moses says something that's kind of, I think, often misunderstood here. He says, don't be afraid. You're not going to see these Egyptians again. The Lord is going to fight for you. You only have to keep still. And on its face, I think that feels like a word of comfort, but I actually think he's saying something different in that. I think he's saying, you folks need to be quiet. You have seen the plagues. You've seen the Red Sea parted, and we've come through, and you're still complaining about things. Come on. And as I think about that, I think about my own life and think, man, how often have I done that? You know, I've seen God's moving in the past on my behalf, and yet it doesn't take long before I'm complaining about something again. One other thing, just quickly, is we think about this chapter, the parting of the Red Sea. There's echoes of this again in the creation story. The wind comes to part the Red Sea in the very beginning of Genesis. We know that there's this wind, ruach in Hebrew, wind or spirit, that comes to reveal the dry land underneath, which is driving back the chaotic waters in order to bring life. So echoes certainly within the creation story of what is happening here with this people, land to deliver them through, to bring new life. In both stories, what is seen as chaotic, these waters, is separated and divided in order to save. And of course, we're going to see glimpses of that once we get into the New Testament as well, of new creation, new birth, born again, born from above. So this newness of life that God brings.
Well, thank you so much. I think the idea that what we're seeing in those parted waters is life, that God has always wanted to reveal, and that we're going to see, of course, that even more vividly in Jesus, is very heartening. And well, I hope you all have a wonderful conversation as you discuss this passage in Exodus.